Hi, I'm going to be talking about an excerpt from Rachel and Her Children by Kozol. This piece discusses child homelessness, particularly of children living out of the Martinique Hotel in New York City. The reading begins by providing us with some context on the present situation of homelessness. In this, he reports that rates of child poverty are rapidly increasing. Despite this, welfare programs and funding for families with children are on the decline. He describes this as a housing discrimination against children, and quotes the New York Times in a powerful quote that reads, "We think a society that harmfully discriminates against its youth betrays its heritage and subverts its future. However, I think that we must question what future, or rather whose future, matters to those who hold power. The reality is that there is a bias against children, and this reality is a sad one." He describes a number of problems in the system that reflect this bias against these children experiencing poverty. First, he talks about the lack of essential healthcare and nutrition programs. This can start at the very conception of these children. If they come from families that experience homelessness and poverty, it is likely that their mothers did not receive proper prenatal health care. This can lead to things like anemia and subsequently a large number of low-weight births and stunted cognitive and physical development of such children. He later describes how this works to solidify this cycle of poverty. He describes the impacts of the Reagan administration on cutbacks to things like Medicare and discussions about child poverty and homelessness, working towards the theme or overall goal of concealment that Kozol describes later. If things like the White House Conference on Children that Reagan canceled are not held, it can grow to mean that these issues are no longer there in the eyes of the majority public. This allows for the image of homelessness that we described in class to flourish, and for the child experiencing homelessness to disappear from their view of reality and become no longer important. The concealment of the issue by taking away programming and funding as Reagan did, Kozol says, also suggests that some of the clinical detachment permits us to attribute failure to the children rather than to a society that endangered him. I think this is a statement that describes many forms of inequality and systemic discrimination of many different groups in our world. This statement explains the confusion between cause and consequence of a certain condition. In this I mean, people begin to think that people that are homeless cause their condition of homelessness by being, for example, lazy or choosing to be employed or choosing to do drugs or drink alcohol. Instead, they do not think that perhaps their condition of homelessness and their unemployment status or drug and alcohol dependency is not the cause, but a condition. The system is pitted against them to create this homelessness, and because they are homeless, the system, not designed in their favor, disallows them to go to school or get a job because of the things Kozol describes. The emotional suffering that they endure is why they might have to turn to things like drugs and alcohol, not because they choose for these to be their reality. This statement is not only applicable to homelessness, but also to things like race and gender. For example, in the larger picture that we will later describe about the overall oppressive, discriminatory systems that we are discussing, this statement can be applied to other systems, such as the prison industrial complex. This statement works perfectly with the words and opinions of people like Mayor Cooch, who say that criminal biological parents are likely to produce criminal sons. How is this different from saying that black people are criminals and not in professional leadership roles because of their biology or because their skull size is different, they are violent or of lesser intellect, when we know that race is not biological? Their condition of being in prison or of being unable to hold positions in leadership in the workplace are because they are suffering the consequences of the greater system that works to perpetuate race is real. This works to keep black people disenfranchised in the effort to maintain white power. And is this not the same power that continues to keep children homeless and impoverished? Kozol goes into detail about how the system is so slanted that children cannot be properly educated. He uses the term transient existence to describe the constant moving of these children from hotel to hotel all over the city. This means that children either cannot keep up with constantly moving schools or cannot make it to the school to which they were originally enrolled because it is so far from where they have to stay at that time. Even when students can make it to class, they do not have the proper nutrients to learn, or often do not have even enough sleep to stay awake. After all, how can a child get a proper sleep in a hotel that facilitates both raising a child and prostitution, drug usage, and other inappropriate activities in those same buildings? As they get lost in the system, they fall behind and become discouraged to go to school, and who would blame them? The combination of systemic neglect through education and housing and food and healthcare amongst all those other human rights he discusses create this failure to thrive. A system that makes it almost impossible for such children to survive, let alone thrive, once again work to maintain the same cycle. Kozol also describes how the buses and taxis organized by the state to transport children that have the will or ability to go to school are another for-profit business, and all the extra money being spent to fix the conditions of the poor system, such as that of poor healthcare or poor building maintenance or poor transportation or the burial of bodies, how could they not instead fix the sufficient Instead, build sufficient housing and programs to help these people get the privileges that are really just human rights. These children suffer physically and mentally from systemic abuse. A horrific incident Kozol presents is that a 19-month-old baby that experiences nightmares and stopped eating. And if these children are not able to only project their anger and emotional distress on themselves, it's projected outwards. And these are the troubled children or the disruptive children that teachers have a hard time containing. So they cannot manage to get the education they need, so they cannot qualify for the jobs, so the system continues to turn the cycle. Finally, Kozol describes the parallels I saw throughout this whole text between Martinique and a prison. The system works to keep those people in the state of homelessness, aka their form of imprisonment, as a way to contain them outside of the view of the public and conceal them. In concealing them, they maintain stereotypes that we described in class as self-inflicting and as causes for the condition, when we know that in many cases they are the consequence. So I want to know why. The structure of homelessness and the systemic actions that work to perpetuate homelessness are not so much different than that of the prison industrial system. It is not only because of the money made directly from the prison system, but the money made at the end of the chain. Disempowering one group empowers another, and it is disgusting to me that those men at the top believe that disempowering and ruining the futures of children is worth the extra dollar in their pocket. Thank you.